All right, good morning. Um, the first lecture today would be about Stellar and Monero, which are two additional cryptocurrencies. So what are Stellar and Monero? They are both in the top 20. And Stellar is based on the paper and ideas from Stanford. The paper is called the Stellar Consensus Protocol, a federated model for internet-level consensus. While Monero is a rare bird in the sense that it's not coming from academia. It's one of the few cryptocurrencies where essentially it's driven, well, no one knows if Satoshi Nakamoto is from academia, but for some of the cryptocurrencies, basically they were driven by individuals with the technical knowledge, but without emphasis on the academic analysis. Okay, so before we start talking about Stellar, we need a bit of background about quorums. So yesterday, you saw a bit of some quorum applications. We were talking about majority. In the context of Paxos, we were talking about majority of acceptors. So the concept of majority can be generalized. Majority is just one specific case for quorums. So what is a quorum? So normally all nodes need to confirm their consent. However, what if some nodes are faulty or slow to respond? That's the motivation for using quorums. And the idea is as following. So for majority, like here it's written in the specific case of majority, so only majority need to confirm, the remaining minority will follow. So how do we generalize it? A quorum system Q is a set of pairwise overlapping sets of nodes such that if there is a set S that belongs to a quorum system such that all nodes in S confirm their consents, this will be enough, right? So we need only one set out of a set of sets, and we need all nodes in that set to confirm. And the other rule is that there could be no two sets belonging to Q to the set of sets, such that nodes in the two sets confirm different values. So usually one could say that a quorum is a set of overlapping sets, pairwise overlapping. So imagine that a quorum would contain 10 different sets. We need a consent sets of nodes. We need a consent from all nodes in one set. But every set among those 10 would be overlapping with every other set within those 10. Okay, so quorums, in most applications, quorums are determined and announced a priori. They are not formed dynamically. So beforehand, we know all about Q and all about different sets that belong to Q. And of course, this approach requires static membership in the system without any dynamic changes, because if nodes can fail and leave the system, while other nodes will be joining the system, which is called churn, by the way, in the computer science terminology. So if you have churn, then we need to update the quorum sets. So the static approach, which is widely used in classic, was widely used in the 90s, for example, and even maybe 20 years ago, so that doesn't work. Okay, so what does Stellar do with quorums? Stellar introduces the concept of federated quorums. So it creates quorums dynamically, so that each node has a set of nodes. Each node V has a set SV of nodes that V trusts. And V proposes to use a subset of SV as a quorum. For example, 3/4 of SV. And in the standard terminology, it's called a quorum slice of V. So each node expresses its desire, specifies the other nodes that this node trusts, and those nodes would constitute the quorum for that node. And different nodes, of course, would propose different slices. And a quorum is a set of nodes that contains a slice for each of its members. Here is an example. So in this example, we have 4 nodes. Sorry, I don't know why it came out a bit blurred. But okay, but I hope it's visible. In this example, there are 4 nodes, V1 to V4. The slices are as following. The slice for V1 is V1, V2, V3, and the slice for V2, the slice for V3, and the slice for V4 is V2, V3, V4. In this case, the quorum would need to include all 4 nodes. Let's take a look at another example. Here we have 10 nodes, and they are divided as following. The first 4 nodes want a slice out of V2, V3, V4, including itself, right? So that's the rule. So V2 would want V2 and 2 additional nodes from this subset. Then we have like the middle tier. In here for these nodes, V5 to V8, the slice would be the node itself plus any 2 additional top tier nodes. So a slice for V6 would be V6 and 2 nodes from here. And then we have a left here, 2 additional nodes. The slice for a node here would be node itself plus 2 additional middle tier nodes. So then we combine, so what would be a quorum? In this case, well, as a matter of fact, the quorum in this case, the quorum in this case would still be like all the nodes, which is not beneficial, because every node wants to include itself. But it's also possible for a slice not to include the node itself, right? Or to include, or it could be. It could be like here, a slice is 3 out of 4 nodes, and if it doesn't need to include itself, then this way we can the size of the quorum on a large-scale system can be significantly smaller than the size of the system itself, which is the point. So the idea of Stellar is to build dynamic federated quorums on the fly. Once the quorum is determined, Stellar executes what's called a federated voting, which is a 3-phase protocol. So it's similar to many other BFT protocols. It includes 3 phases, not 2 phases like Paxos. And in this protocol, this protocol, I mean, the main purpose, of course, is to reach consensus. So a node nominate a particular value multiple times, or it may actually nominate different values, like change the vote and vote for different values. So that's the first stage. In the second stage, a node would confirm a single value, would commit to a single value. Like in this example, this is the state diagram for one particular node. So initially the node is then committed, and then the node would be voting for two different values. And then there would be an exchange with the other nodes, and based on the exchange, the node would see which value is the majority and commit to that value by accepting the value. So it may vote for A and A tag, but it would only accept A. And then there is a quorum in parallel to this process. There is a quorum discovery, because initially a node doesn't know what a quorum is, and from whom there is a need to collect the votes. Quorums are dynamic and built on the fly. So in parallel, by this stage, a node would know the constitution. And at this point, a node can detect that there is a quorum which accepts this value. As soon as a node learns that there is a quorum which has accepted the value, at this point it would confirm. And then it can proceed with the next instance of consensus. So if there are failures, and again we are also talking about crash, but also about Byzantine failures, then confirming may take several communication rounds. Yeah, I should also mention that after the value is accepted, the node would stop voting. So the protocol, the specific protocol of Stellar is actually very, very complicated. And that's because of different rules, how to build quorums, and when the quorum may accept the value and when the quorum may not accept the value. So, so over at least 5 years, there have been many papers, a lot of research on the exact semantics of the consensus protocol in Stellar. It's one of the most complicated protocols among cryptocurrencies. So I'm not going into details. I'm just giving a high-level overview. One very interesting property of consensus in Stellar is individual liveness. What does it mean? I mean, usually in consensus protocols, you want agreement, the safety property, meaning no safety property means no two good processes, honest processes would ever disagree with each other, would ever produce different values. And we want liveness. Liveness means that every honest node would eventually produce a value. So in most consensus protocols, the liveness is universal, right? So the protocol moves forward as a whole. If one node can proceed with consensus and another node, one honest node can proceed with consensus, then another honest node may proceed with consensus. It never happens in most consensus protocols that only a subset of honest nodes proceed. In Stellar, the situation is different because of the individual quorum rules. So let's come back to this example. It's the same example we saw previously. Now imagine that all nodes here failed. What happens in this case? Well, these nodes may still proceed with consensus and confirm and accept values, because they need a slice of 3 out of this subset, and this subset is perfectly functioning. So as a result, the subset would have liveness provided to them. They would make progress on consensus. On the other hand, the nodes in this subset, also the nodes in this subset, would not have liveness provided to them. And therefore, a very unique characteristic of Stellar is that liveness is individual and not global for the entire system. There are some interesting additional tidbits about Stellar. So how a quorum discovered during voting? Upon nominating a value, a node also sends information about its quorum slices. And again, to get confirmed, the value needs to be confirmed by one slice from each node. Sorry for the typo, it's not slide, it's slice from each node. So that's interesting, right? So a node sends information about its quorum slice together with the value it votes for. And then everyone would need to calculate the union of different slices. And that's done on the fly. And again, the rules are quite complicated about Stellar approaches, the dynamic calculation, the union, because some nodes may be Byzantine and may be sending some totally arbitrary slices. The Stellar system has additional optimizations. For example, if deployed at a large scale, then sets of nodes would elect a representative. So again, it's very similar to committee selection in Algorand. And then only the committee would send slices. So the committee selection is similar to Algorand, but in Algorand, the committee proposes a block. In Stellar, the committee nodes in the committee would send slices. So how does Stellar compare with alternative approaches? So here the mechanisms are proof of work, proof of stake, Byzantine Agreement Protocol, and Stellar Consensus Protocol. And the dimensions of comparison are as follows. Decentralized control over quorum. Is quorum determined in a centralized way or in a decentralized way? How high or low is the latency of the protocol? How flexible are the trust assumptions in the protocol? And what level of there are certain security guarantees, but they're probably less relevant for us. Okay, so decentralized control. Proof of work, such as the mechanism in Bitcoin, provides total decentralized control, so there is no centralization. The same about proof of stake. However, for classical Byzantine agreement, like Paxos, someone needs to configure the quorums a priori, beforehand. In which case, you don't get any decentralized control and flexibility over the constitution of quorum. And this is where the consensus is stellar, basically making the most contribution. It's also low latency, so it's similar to normal Byzantine agreement and much lower than proof of work. And it also provides flexible trust configuration. So that was the short overview of Stellar. Now I'm proceeding to the second system, which is called Monero. What's the motivation? So Monero is totally different from Stellar. So we just combine them together, like package them together in a single lecture, but they're totally different beasts. All right, so what's the motivation for Monero? Monero is similar to Bitcoin, but with some additional privacy-related guarantees. So why is the creator of Monero was dissatisfied with Bitcoin? Well, transactions in Bitcoin can be traced. What exactly does it mean? Well, for each input, we can build we know where we know the output, which connects to this input, the same UTXO, right? So we have a UTXO here, and then we use it as the input in another transaction. So this way we can build, first of all, a graph of transactions. And everyone would be able to see, this graph is publicly available for everyone, not just to the parties involved in a particular transaction. This graph is undesirable even when participants are represented by public keys and not by real identities. Because, for example, the sender of a particular, like the receiver of the transaction would usually know the sender of the transaction along with her public key. And therefore, like, two different senders can collude and learn more about the entity, the sender of transaction B. And okay, another example. If the transaction is very large, meaning it has a lot of inputs and a lot of outputs, then most likely this transaction belongs to some bulk user, not an individual user, perhaps a crypto exchange. So this way, by looking at the graph, we can understand certain things. And that is undesirable in terms of privacy. All right, so what Monero was set to solve was the problem of transaction traceability. And the two properties that Monero wanted to guarantee were sender untraceability and receiver unlinkability. What is sender untraceability? Given a transaction, there is a set of equiprobable senders, meaning, well, I'm going to demonstrate what it means on the next slide. So, sender untraceability implies sender unlinkability, which is the property that given to transactions, we cannot say if they were sent by the same sender. It also implies that given to transaction, we cannot say if the receiver of the first is the sender of the second. And therefore, we cannot build a graph of transactions the way we did in Bitcoin. The second property is receiver unlinkability, which means that given two transactions, it's computationally infeasible, hard, to determine if they were sent to the same receiver. So those are nice properties in terms of privacy. But of course, the main challenge is how we can guarantee those properties alongside with checking, alongside with defending against double spending, for example. Okay, let's take a look at the example. In Monero, an input has multiple pair transactions, of which one is real and the rest are fake. And for the fake transaction, they use the term of mix-ins. So you see here in transaction B is linked not with just one output, but in this example with 3 different outputs, of which one is real and the other 2 is fake. But from the outside, we don't know which one is the real one. And this is the way to achieve untraceability of the sender. How is this property achieved in Monero? The answer is that they use yet another cryptographic primitive, which is called ring signatures. So in Bitcoin, Alice, when Alice sends a transaction, she signs it with her private key and a public key of the receiver, to make sure that only the receiver can decode the transaction, can receive the funds using the receiver's private key, okay? Now, in Monero it's different. With ring signatures, Alice, the sender, picks an anonymity group, which consists, say, of four senders, Bob, Carol, Derek, and Eve, and then Alice signs the message in a very interesting way. She signs the message with her private key and the public key of Alice, Bob, Carol, Derek, and Eve. Now, what ring signature gives us is that everyone can see that the sender is within the group. So, without having a private key, it's not possible to build a ring signature. However, which sender from the group is equiprobable? And thus nobody can see that can determine that the sender is Alice. The receiver may possess this information. Though, because, like, for example, you purchase goods from Amazon.com, you know this, and okay, so Amazon.com would know that it's you, or at least may know that it's you. However, so it's not complete untraceability, but it's much more limited. It's not open to the entire world to see the graph of transactions. So is it clear how ring signatures work? Well, I have not explained how you build the ring signatures, but how they are used to achieve untraceability. So again, we have a group of senders, and any sender from the group can use his or her private signature along with the his or her private key, along with the public keys of all senders, all nodes within the group. And that's a ring signature. And then everyone could see, everyone from outside the group could see that it's signed, the message is signed by the group, but no one knows by whom within the group. So this is how untraceability is achieved, but as mentioned, sender untraceability complicates detection of double spending. Because now the same token can be legitimately used as an input in multiple transactions. But only once it will be the real token. In other cases, it will be a mixing. It will be fake. But still, from the outside, it looks like double spending, right? The same token, the same output is used as the input to multiple transactions, and that's valid, unlike Bitcoin. Okay, so how do we know that it's double spending in this case? So in order to provide defense protection against double spending, Monero uses the concept of a one-time ring signature. It's a modification of the typical ring signature. And in one-time ring signature, each private key can be used only once for the same token. Okay, so what happens if the private key is used more than once for the same token? I mean, that would be a double spending, of course. The real problem, like, when does double spending occur in Monero? When the same token is used not as a mixing, but as a real value, as a real input to multiple transactions. And in order to achieve that, the double spender would need to use the secret key on the same token. And this is what Monero prevents. So what happens if the same private key is used twice on the same token? In this case, the one-time ring signature mechanism deliberately breaks sender untraceability. And this way, everyone will be able to see that it's the same sender in both cases. So it's quite an interesting extension of the ring signature mechanism. So of course the scheme weakens untraceability for the sake of protection against double spending, but there is a bit of a trade-off. Okay, so that was about sender untraceability. What about the receiver side? What about receiver unlinkability? So Monero achieves receiver unlinkability in the following way. The sender produces a one-time address of the receiver, using the public key of the receiver and the private key of the sender. So it's very interesting because in Bitcoin, it's the receiver who produces the receiver address, not the sender. That's natural. I mean, usually when I ask someone to transfer me money, I'm supposed to give the bank account information. But in this case, in Monero, it's the sender who determines the address of the receiver. So the sender produces a one-time address of the receiver. And okay, so how does the receiver even know that it's the other, like I'm the receiver? How do I even know that this is my address and that the transaction is intended for me? In order to achieve that, the receiver can detect that the transfer is to her using her private key. So the receiver is supposed to continually scan all new transactions in the ledger. And then, using the private key, she would be able to detect that this is her, that this particular transfer is intended for her. Of course, continuously scanning all transactions can be quite an expensive operation for the receiver. So Monero introduces a few additional optimizations how to make it more efficient. So you can, Monero is one of those systems which makes heavy use of the cryptography. And of course, the next lecture we will see another family of systems which also makes heavy use of the cryptography in the blockchain domain. Yeah, if you have any questions, please ask. All right. So what's the perception and criticism of Monero? Monero provides very nice properties with respect to privacy, but they do come at a cost. The first issue is that more mix-ins means bigger transactions, and for bigger transactions, you need to usually pay higher fees to the miner. Therefore, the fees, like transactions, are more expensive in Monero compared to Bitcoin. Okay, second issue. If the use of mix-ins in a transaction is essentially at the discretion of a sender. How many mix-ins should I use? Well, Monero doesn't want to dictate the number of mix-ins because the sender would need to pay higher fees, right? So the sender can select to use 5 mix-ins, can select to use 20 mix-ins, or can select to not to use mix-ins at all. 0 mix-ins, also possible, at the discretion of the sender. But herein lies a problem. Imagine that there is a sender which opted not to use any mix-ins. This is the situation is illustrated here. Say transaction B picked only one real input. Of course, it means that by doing that, the sender of transaction B broke the untraceability for itself. However, it's worse, because it turns out that by doing that, the sender of transaction B breaks untraceability also for other transactions. Why? Look at this example. Transaction, okay, okay, sorry, I said transaction B. It was actually the sender of transaction A which made this choice, not the receiver of transaction B. But now look at transaction C. The sender of transaction C decided to use one mix-in. And it happened to be exactly the same No, okay, sorry. what I said was a bit incorrect. So the problem here is with transaction C. In transaction C, the sender decided not to use any mix-ins. And therefore, this input has only one corresponding output, and there is no ring here. There are no mix-ins for this one, okay? So the sender of transaction C decided to break traceability for itself. However, it also creates a problem for transaction A, because the sender of transaction A decided to use one mix-in, which happened to be exactly this output. However, now everyone knows that this output corresponds to this input, so it cannot correspond to this output. And by realizing this, we can come to the conclusion that this input corresponds to this output, and this mix-in doesn't help at all. So sorry for the confusion. I hope the example is understandable now. And this is just one scenario. It turns out that the untraceability can still be broken in a number of other scenarios as well. For example, by using the value analysis. The value of the transfers are still in plain text for everyone to see, and therefore we can check the values, and the sum of the inputs must be equal to the sum of the outputs in every transaction. And by using this rule, it may still be possible to break down traceability. And we previously talked about attacks such as double spending. Double spending is protected against by disclosing the sender. But if we disclose the sender, we may break traceability not just for that sender, but we may compromise the entire graph. Therefore, the protection in Monero is still considered to be relatively fragile, despite all the nice ideas. So that's the end of the lecture, and I would be happy to take additional questions. A blockchain, sorry, what is public or private? What happens? Transaction? I'm trying to fully understand. Like I understand what you are saying, but I still trying to grasp the entire scenario, right? So yes, in Monero there are there are blocks like the same as and there is mining. So in that sense, it's the same as Bitcoin. Yes. So who is responsible for what operation? So which operation are you looking the responsible party for? Okay, so that's not specific to, your question is not specific to Monero, right? I mean, you could ask the same question about Bitcoin, right? What happens if by you are saying it's the mistake of the sender, right? So the sender by mistake send the coin to a different user. There is no protection against that. Like it's Many things in Bitcoin are irreversible. Some theft of coins is also can also be irreversible. So I mean I can talk about two specific cases, like in which I was a bit involved, and it happened in Norway. So there was a billionaire, or he's still a billionaire, whose wife disappeared, and which was very strange. I mean, how someone could kidnap the wife. But anyway, the kidnappers asked him to pay a ransom in Bitcoin. So when he did it, the police was already involved, and so they tried to trace the transaction. Despite all that, sort of the kidnappers managed to disappear somewhere like Caribbean islands, like the other part of the globe. So the police invoked Interpol. Interpol has been searching for those funds for 3 years. At the end, they gave up. So this is the extent to which like the operations are irreversible and fragile in Bitcoin. Now, I'm signing with when I'm signing something with the private key and I give the signature, I disclose my private key. I only disclose the signature. It's interesting. It's a single signature. No, it's an operation which takes multiple keys and produces a single signature. So now, what happened? Okay, so how do we know that it's correct signature? Anyone can take the public keys of all participants in the anonymity group, and just by using the public keys, confirm that this is a signature. But using only public keys, it's impossible to produce the signature. In order to produce the signature, someone needs to use at least one private key from the group. What do you mean right? Right in what sense? What verification of what? That it's a valid transaction because well, it's a valid transaction because of this property that the same private key can be used on the same token only once. So this is how they know, because if the same private key is used twice, then the identity would be disclosed.
Like if we go for the anonymity, then how we will prove that this is a valid transaction? And if we are proving that this is a valid transaction, then how will we maintain the anonymity? That matters.
Well, as long as it's not used the second time, the anonymity is maintained. So we can check that the identity, like the identity of the sender is disclosed. Of course.
In Stellar, you told that the forum, what they are selecting to participate in consensus. So are they selected randomly, or is there any parameter that to be selecting the forum? Randomly, each node will propose.
No, it's not random. It's all policy, but like.
So what is the parameter?
Okay, I can say like it's like in politics, right? I can say I trust that organization, but I don't trust, say, another party, another political party, or another organization. I trust my friends, like in the social network. So every node decides for its the node represents a person, okay?
So each
So the person decides for himself or herself whom to trust.
So each node will maintain a trust parameter. Based on that, other nodes will do the quorum.
Exactly. That's the whole point. Each node autonomously determines its trust.
Worst case, if every node selects itself, then there will be no quorum.
Then it's a problem. So in the world, like there are rules to be enforced, right? So if every node selects itself, then the quorum would need to contain everyone in the system. Which defeats the purpose of quorums. So that's not a good situation.
How to resolve that situation? It will keep on going in infinity loop. till the quorum-
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I guess one could say that there is an incentive to avoid this situation, right? Because like everyone understands, if I pick myself, then everyone would do the same, and then the system would not be operational, right? And there is an incentive to make the system operational. So this is why there are certain recommendations how to select your quorum, your slice, okay? In stellar terminology is the slice. So there are recommendations how to do it in a good way.
What are those recommendations?
Those recommendations would be like a certain number. For example, like slices should not be too small because that would be too limiting, right? Like if you select, for example, just one of your friends, then what happens if this friend crashes, right? It's a problem. So the slices shouldn't be too small. On the other hand, if you make your slice too big, then again everyone would need or too big or select nodes which do not overlap with other slices like yourself, then it results in a very large quorum at the end. So you need to maintain the balance. Also, you need to bake in some flexibility. What do I mean by flexibility? A good policy would be 3/4 of a given set. So it's not, you need to be a bit flexible, right? You do not say, okay, I need vote from this, and this, from very specific nodes. Say, I would be happy to get 3/4 of the votes from this set. And this way you can tolerate failures of some of the nodes within the set or temporary disconnections. There are more rules, but again, Stellar is one of the most complicated systems among cryptocurrencies.